I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behaviour Speak. In this conversation, Ingy Alireza shares her journey as a behavior analyst in Bahrain, discussing the challenges and evolution of autism support services in the region. She highlights the cultural influences on education, the role of parents in advocating for their children, and the need for more practitioners in training in behavior analysis. Ingy emphasizes the importance of mental health in autism support and the potential of technology to enhance services. The discussion also touches on current projects she's involved in, including the development of NUMUW, a new platform providing multidisciplinary services to families. Welcome, Ingy.
Thank you.
Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I am producing this podcast on the territories of the Kalam and Kalelu, Somoko, and Comox First Nations and the Seychelles First Nations. So as always, grateful to be here. So Ingy, tell me a little about yourself.
Okay, my name is Ingy Alireza. I'm a BCBA, but also early childhood educator by training. I'm from Bahrain. I trained in New York at Teachers College, and then I stayed on for a year and worked at the McCartan School. And during that time, I did my behavioral certification and moved back to the region and kind of was feeling very lonely as a behavior analyst back then. Here, when there wasn't anyone around, to be honest, worked with families privately in Saudi, Beirut, Bahrain, and then decided it was time to have to settle down and to have a brick and mortar center in Bahrain to serve kids with developmental delays. So that's been running for 12 years now. Since then, about 3 years ago, or maybe 2.5 years ago, I've started a online platform connecting families and professionals to other more maybe senior specialists in the area of child and adolescent development and mental health, and kind of just, trying to see how to fill the gaps of what I see as service needs in our region.
Right on, right on. And so what made you get into this behavior analysis field?
Honestly, it was completely accidental. My undergrad degree is in literature, and I was doing voluntary work at a special needs school, and I instantly fell in love with profile of students there that I had no idea what they were diagnosed with or what their learning challenges or behavioral challenges were. I later discovered that they all were on the autism spectrum and that it was never boring. There wasn't a minute of boredom when I was around them. And so that's it. I needed to learn how they learned because I knew I wanted to be around them. So that was what happened. And so then I kind of just kept with the voluntary work. I didn't even know what were the proper teaching procedures. I wasn't aware. And even when I went to Teachers College, I wasn't enrolled in an ABA course at all because I was just enrolled in a special education course. And it was through a student placement at the St. Luke's Hospital that I met an amazing practitioner called Michael Boardman. And then when I saw him teach, that's what I was like, what are you doing? And how can I learn it? And so he opened my eyes to ABA. And that's when I started to retrain and just wanted to focus and learn more about what seemed to be the only thing that I could see bringing meaningful results.
And was your discovery of sort of the world of autism in the States or in Bahrain?
It was in the UK, actually, because I did my undergrad in the UK, and the special needs school had a variety of kids, they have different learning issues, and 3 or 4 in the classroom had autism. And
do you have a certification with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or are certified through your region's Behavior Analyst Credentialing Board? You can earn continuing education units for this episode by going to www.behaviorspeak.com and clicking on CEU. First secret word is think, THINK, think.
It was just fascinating to me how they learned, how they moved around their environment, how they compensated maybe for their lack of communication skills, but seemed to just, manage very well in other areas. So that was my first exposure to students on the spectrum. And I was very intrigued about how they learn.
Let's talk a little bit about Bahrain first. Where is Bahrain, and kind of tell me a little bit about the place?
Okay, so Bahrain is the smallest country in the GCC. We are tiny, but to be fair, very advanced educationally for our region at the time. We had early education for women. We had a big movement for education earlier on than the rest of the countries in the region. And I grew up in kind of a mixed environment because I was educated at American Department of Defense school, so I was exposed to American culture. At the American system early on. So it felt, it was really nice. It was very cosmopolitan. There were, I think, over 60 nationalities in the school that I was in. Even though I was in a small country, I was really exposed early on to a lot of cultures, a lot of ways of thinking. And that was obviously a great privilege for me because I had that level of exposure early on. I felt comfortable. And there's a lot of obviously of ideas, exchange of ways of living. So for a small place, it delivered a lot in terms of a rich childhood.
Well, yeah, how'd you end up at that school?
It was one of the first private schools on the island. My parents didn't want us to have just a national education. They wanted an international education. And that was one of the few options. They also liked just the way of thinking there, the way that it attracted many nationalities. They wanted that kind of atmosphere. And so I was lucky enough to be there from the age of 6 until graduation at 16. So it was great.
And kind of historically, has this country been sort of its own thing for a long time? What's sort of a Bahrain story?
So since the 70s, we've been independent. Prior to that, we were a British protectorate. And so it's always been a very welcoming and hospitable country, a very flexible. Yeah, there isn't that rigidity. Even there's a lot of just different subcultures within Bahrain, the different communities, whether that's, from originally from Iraq or from Iran or from the Arabian Peninsula or from Southeast Asia. You have a lot of nice blends. And yeah, it has that island feeling. People are happy. They're kind of chilled. Sometimes that can be great. Other times it can be frustrating. But overall, say that it's a really authentic place to grow up. There's always been that rich kind of variety. It's never been boring or homogenous because I know sometimes you go to another country and it seems, very exciting, but then you're like, everybody kind of seems the same. And I never got that feeling growing up in Bahrain.
Why is it that way? Why is it so sort of diverse and multicultural there?
I think trade, to be honest, I think that trade was part of our culture, traded with India, traded with Iran. And so I think trade brings an exchange of ideas and a familiarity, comfort level. You're not landlocked. You're island that opens you up and obviously enriches you if you allow for those influences to come in. And so I think it's lucky just geographically. It's lucky, and it's kind of had an influence on the nature of the people and their openness. If you land in Bahrain and you jump into a Bahraini taxi driver's car, you're going to have a really nice exchange. He might even invite you for lunch with his family. It's still that kind of place, which is nice, and I hope it's like that.
And so what made you decide to kind of come back home to work?
There was pressure from the family, obviously, after being away for a while. And also you felt like, okay, so I'm learning all these skills. The US is saturated by providers, even the UK to some extent, where we all want to feel like what we're doing is important and it's changing a situation. And I felt, well, I could make more difference back home than I can in other places. And so I went back home, but it was really hard because it was an unknown field and nobody wants to necessarily feel like a pioneer because it's a lot of work and you're always, you can't just get to the business of doing what it is you want to do. You have to explain what it is you want to do. It's not always what you sign up for, but sometimes you have to do that. And initially there was a bit of a negative connotation attached to ABA, not from the community at large because they kind of had a blank slate. So if but it was more from like educators and like, especially British curriculum schools. And there seemed to that idea that ABA is robotic and it just kind of doesn't help people develop comprehensively. They become rigid and rote and all the same cliches that you've heard a million times. That was very much like the perception of what ABA does and who it can be applied to. It has to be applied to, severely challenged individuals learning just to modify their behaviors. There was zero awareness of it as a science. It was all like a rigid application by very rigid practitioners. That was like, whoa, I didn't know that. So I walked in blind. I know that was their perception. I was confused because the way I'd seen it implemented was the opposite of that. It'd be applied to very different situations and needs. And so for me, it was like, whoa, I didn't know I was going to have to defend this at all. I just thought I was. And then to be fair, I started seeing a lot of misrepresentation and a lot of bad practicing. And I was like, oh, I want to distance myself from that as well. And so only with time and with more and more people practicing that were credible and then results, speaking for themselves, did that kind of change. Initially, I even had an educator come to a talk and in Bahrain that we were just doing the introduction of ABA. And he's like, I'm here because parents say this work. And I was like, well, that's a great endorsement. I respect that you're willing to come and have a listen. And yeah, there's some things we can do well. And obviously there's things we can't do well. And the fact that you're open to the conversation as a school, who we serve some of your student population in the afternoon in our center, I think it would be great to see what you do best and what we do best and kind of like bring that together. But it's always the families, right? It's always the families that pull the profession together. And it was the case for us as well. It was the families who created the bridge to the schools that were resistant.
And so give me a bit of a timeline. So when was it that you went back and started doing the work?
So let's say 2016, I got certified as 2006, I got certified as a behavior analyst. And then I started the center around, I would say, 5 years later. And in a much like smaller version than it is currently. So it was in my car and driving around and then I was able to rent one office, which you'd literally walk in and that was a therapy room and the reception and everything. And it was only like 2 years later that we moved to a facility that had multiple rooms and a real reception and the whole. So when I'm speaking about serving clients and the parents, like creating the bridge between us and the schools, that was really 2010, 11, around that time.
What did the autism sort of support field look like when you got there and sort of what was the history there?
Yeah, it didn't look great. It looked like a lot of glorified babysitting. Kids were staying without communication. I don't think it wasn't accepted that communication is a right and a possibility. And so there weren't really many explorations on, or even much effort put into developing communication. There wasn't the concept that it's the cornerstone of everything else. And so you would be a lot of like tasks, like fine motor tasks and matching. And you're just like, how does this connect to anything? But it's the easiest to implement, right? Because and it looks like people are busy. It looks like things are changing.
Yeah.
Couldn't functionally any programs that were really thinking on a deeper level. How is this child going to be in a year or even in 6 months? Because I don't think they knew how to move the needle. So it was like, we're doing the best we can, but it looked like glorified babysitting. And then I don't really want, it's a bit depressing to think about the issues with behavior and how they were dealt with, because that just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart. It didn't go anywhere. Lots of people suffered unnecessarily, not through bad intentions, but because of complete lack of education or awareness. And I just feel like I wish we could give all those people that time back,
What about awareness? What is sort of the state of sort of understanding of just autism and sort of the acceptance or awareness of as a diagnosis and stigma and that sort of thing?
Zero awareness. Like autism was a sentence. Like it was like nobody wanted that label. And you would not expose your kid to being evaluated. If you had the means and you wanted to support and you had a bit more awareness, You would travel, you would get this abroad, you would get evaluation abroad, unless it was completely blatantly obvious. But even then, I think the majority of people culturally dealt with it by hushing it up and dealing as best they can internally with the resources they have. It wasn't accepted. It really was because people didn't think there was hope. So why highlight and expose your child or your family to something that didn't seem to have much hope attached to it? And I feel like that was for a long time the situation. And then there's amazing parents of kids on the spectrum who changed all that by having the courage to set up, to set up services, to bring awareness, to talk about their stories. It's honestly always the parents. It's really always, in my experience, it's always been the parents that shifted things. And then the parents recruit whatever resources they need because they are invested in their kid. So if it's professionals, we bring along the best professionals we trust. If it's, if it's community activity, we make sure we do that. They're just always leading the way. There's always iconic parent that does that. In Bahrain, we have that as well.
And so was there a time when that really kind of started, like when parents really started speaking up?
Yes, there was an organization set up and is still running today. It honestly provides, I feel like the widest range of services for families at the lowest cost possible. They are partnered with the government now, and they're really carrying the burden of, I wouldn't say the burden, but they've been the trailblazers in sort of expanding the amount of services and access to families. There's been a lot of awareness. They were the pioneers for sure. And then since then, you have different individuals, whether specialists or parents, that have been using kind of social media. And that's really been great. It gives people a platform and it gives others exposure without necessarily, seeking it out or publicly being seen to look for the information. And all of that obviously has accelerated awareness, accelerated acceptance. Before, you had to go and have an event or you had to have speakers, you had to have this physical presence. And now that's all been, you can get so much further with all the tools and the younger generation are super comfortable, much more aware. Obviously, stigma still there because I believe truly because the services have not reached the point where everybody's accessing high quality services and seeing great outcomes. And I feel like once that happens, the stigma will keep falling as the quality outcomes improve. Yeah.
So what were some of those early days like for you when kind of coming in and no one even has a clue what ABA is? How'd you get started?
So you mean at training or when I was like working?
Like when you were sort of introducing this to the country.
Yeah. I was doing it, at that point, people would seek you out. You don't need to market because there was one of you. So if you did a good job with someone's kid, another parent would find you, right? So at least we didn't have to worry about that. And then it was literally just in the beginning, I remember I met a family and I finished my master's and I told the parent, there's so much I still don't know how to do. They didn't teach me how to start a program. I can teach, I can do different things, I can do discrete things, but like conceptualizing a program from A to Z, thinking about your family priorities, your values, where you want him in a year. No one trained me to do that. They trained me to implement, and I was like, I think we should, if you don't mind, let's go to this consultant. I picked like my dream consultant and I said, go there. They'll do a whole program evaluation. They'll do our whole write up the program. And she's like, let's do it. And I was just like, because I would go there and, much more senior people would be, showing me how they start a program, showing me how they evaluate different skills. And I was learning on the job. Lucky me were families who could afford me that opportunity.
It's great that you started off so very humble. I think had you kind of gone in there saying you knew everything and kind of brought it to them, it might have failed and you might have had different outcomes.
For sure, I would have had different outcomes. I knew what the outcomes would be. I'd have been successful in a few things, but the whole picture wouldn't have been fitting together. I just didn't have the exposure. Like I wasn't trained to think that way. And so maybe training is different now, but 20 years ago, 24 years ago, it wasn't.
And so how were, in the early days, I guess people were paying out of pocket. Probably not a lot of folks were able to afford the services. The second secret word is island, ISLAND, island.
Yeah. And unfortunately, to some extent, that's still the case. To some extent, that's still the case. And that's why I have so much admiration for this society that has been set up by the parent, because she's tried to make the services very, very affordable. But, it's unless there is a massive increase in the number of practitioners in our region, we're not going to see a significant decline in the cost of service. Set up a charity called NUMUW to address this issue, to work with the government as a partner to be able to get people certified. So still doing that. And because that's one of our pathways to reducing the costs and, opening up access. And, we're still trying a lot of efforts. We personally in Bahrain do not have a training pathway to become a behavior analyst. So that's still something that would be hugely beneficial in increasing the number of practitioners. We have very smart graduates of education and psychology programs, and there's really no reason why they could not retrain or, kind of reconfigure their degrees so that it meets the criteria to become a behavior analyst. And so a lot of it, they kind of discover the field after they graduate. And that's where we hope organizations like NUMUW can make them aware, this is, first of all, it's a great professional opportunity. It's something you can do anywhere in the world, not just in Bahrain. And there's a huge need. So in our mind, the way to increase access is to increase awareness on the professional side that this is a certification that could really help them support the needs of kids on the spectrum, but just even behaviorally, like in schools, there's a huge demand for behavioral support. Huge.
Well, you said there's not too many folks. And how many folks are practicing right now, do you figure?
I'd have to confirm for you, but I would say probably not more than 15 in Bahrain.
Wow.
I will double check those numbers for you, obviously.
But but probably only an accurate number there. 15 is not a very high number. So even if it was 25 or 10, I mean, that's still not a lot of folks. And you were the first certified in 2006 pieces. There's a program in Bahrain, but there are programs in some of the country. Are there programs in sort of nearby countries, or is it that folks have to go so far away to get training?
There are. So the programs in the nearby countries are distinctive in the fact that they are integrated into a bachelor's or a master's degree program. So you know what I mean?
I get you.
Yeah. So in KSA, they have, in the UAE, they have, essentially in others, they're developing them. But now, if you're Bahraini, you'd have to do it online. And also, we're not covered anymore by the behavior analyst board, the WASI. And so we have other boards, and they also have their learning pathways to certification, their accredited courses.
So it sounds like the big barrier is that you have a lot of folks that might be interested in doing it, but they already have degrees, and so they have to go get more training. Whereas if folks could just sort of start a degree and get the training sort of within, when maybe there'd be some hope.
For sure, because also just knowing the awareness that this degree exists, is widespread. So even at that level, just having it as an option, people start saying, "Oh, there's this. I could go into this." So people are learning about behavior analysis much later and its applications later, then that just creates more delay. And like you said, I need another budget. So that's why we're trying to work through the charity with the government to fund some of the coursework, because it isn't something that people didn't think of. Let's say their undergraduate degree is free or they budgeted for that. Then you have to budget again for more professional certification. It's just another barrier that we don't need at the moment.
I'm just thinking about sort of how many folks you need to do this work. Tell me a little bit sort of geography wise, what's sort of the population of Bahrain, and just to kind of get an idea of how big of a country it is.
So the population is, I believe, around 1.5 million, but there's a lot of expats in that mix. We're a small country. Yeah, 1.5, around 1.5. And then the local population, I would have to check, is a lot smaller than that. We have a lot of expats in Bahrain. Let's see. Oh, so 46 to 47%, about 740K local population.
Okay, so it's not a giant population, but still 15 is not enough to sort of get to all the folks need to get to.
If we're saying 1 in 5 kids, definitely.
Right. Yeah. And so what is being done right now? So you're trying, so this association is trying to get sort of more funding and more support. Are folks trying to sort of create an in-country training program, or is that work being done?
I think that there's been talks, so we've been discussing it, and it's just a matter of seeing the demand. At the end of the day, every university program is also has to consider what the demand will be. And so nothing has been solidified, but there's definitely discussions and an understanding of the need. To my knowledge, there is nothing set to be developed yet.
And in terms of kind of, now there are sort of these sort of, with some of these other certifications you were talking about, there are like sort of separate kind of course sequences folks can take that are sort of separate from a degree. Is there any ideas of maybe developing something like that instead?
More so that, but again, tying it in with, for example, a learning support route and not just a behavior analyst route. So I think there needs to be more conviction on the people in universities that there is a substantial need just for this, and it depends really on the orientation of the people directing the universities. So like if you get who has a more generic special education background, maybe doesn't have so much grounding in sort of behavioral approaches to learning and teaching, they may not be as inclined. So yeah, it's a work in progress, let's say.
And then about sort of just for funding for services, is there any sort of kind of government or state funding for some of the work?
Yes, so there is a stipend once you have officially been diagnosed. Unfortunately, it doesn't match the cost or intensity of services required to make meaningful change for different kids. And that's why the hope is that more of these low cost centers who do serve kids who are trying to make do with the government sponsorship, there's a push, I believe, the hope from let's say our organization is to create capacity within. So to take existing specialists there and to expose them to the new certification, and then to have like ripple effect. Once one person is certified, hopefully then they can, improve the quality of the services. But that's the strategy. It takes time to see the effect of that, but it's a way to keep costs down and to be able to improve quality within these low cost centers that are being government funded.
And for the most part, are these services that these 15 or 20 behavior analysts providing all in these centers?
No, unfortunately, they tend to go towards the private centers. That's where they can get, the salary that, the compensation that they're for. So yes, it is ultimately that the private centers are attracting the most certified people, and so benefiting is the people who can afford those services.
And what about sort of frontline folks? Do you have sort of the RBTs in Bahrain, and what does that all look like?
Yeah, so it was a double-edged sword, as you probably know, like anywhere else. It gave a lot more people access to a taste of the services, but then people misrepresented what they could. And so then there was an abuse of the system. So you have people like throwing in that title, and then the consumer doesn't know the difference. Well, I heard that name and it sounds a bit like that one. So it's probably, and so this was, I feel like, a disservice to families in ways, and it was misleading. It was in many cases, because you were trying to make a massive differentiation between support with the title and support without the title, and to be here practice and without the proper oversight, there isn't a massive differentiation at all. Yeah. So Frontline, it really is super dependent on the organization that has employed them and the type of training that they get exposed to. But like I said, through social media, through the increase in awareness, then they themselves are sometimes seeking out and paying for their own, like professional development and certification. So there is a lot of good momentum because there's more awareness, and there is still abuse of these titles, but like with any profession, I don't think it's just for us. So quality kind of fluctuates, and it's the standardization that I think everybody struggles with. How do you standardize these things? And I don't know what's working elsewhere, but I think the outcomes speak for themselves, and then different professionals and different organizations become associated with better outcomes, and maybe that encourages others. But in terms of ABA, we don't have any national regulation or criteria for the implementation of that. Or if there is, it doesn't align with necessarily the board criteria or the different board areas. It becomes you have to have a psychology background, you have to have practice, for X amounts of years, but there isn't a breakdown of the protocols or the evidence-based approach or what you're using. We don't have that. So I'm not sure how that is in other places, but there's still that it's not there yet.
I think it's quite similar in a lot of countries. There's a lot of countries that are struggling with the RBT issue and folks sort of representing themselves as the pro, because, if someone doesn't know anything, a BCBA versus an RBT, what's the difference, right? It's all a job title that sounds cool to someone who doesn't know anything, right? And so you've got a certificate that says RBT on it, that could sound like you're the leading expert in the country, right? And that's been a thing. And with no regulation, everyone's accessing funding and no supervision, and these problems keep going and going. Some of these countries have tried to start sort of associations. Has there been anything like that in Bahrain where sort of you've all kind of got together to support each other that way?
Yes. So there was a move in Bahrain to have a chapter of ABAI, but I know that on a sort of a larger scale, we're looking to have sort of Arab boards for behavior analysis. And I think if it's not yet established, it's in the process of being established. And it's just bringing together, people from the region and the culture who understand the regulations, who understand the barriers, to create their own board. I think that this will be obviously an opportunity because they can take on a lot of initiatives in terms of researching regulations across the region, unify that, how to bring that up. And they're all very seasoned clinicians, and they're coming to it with the right intention. So I do hope that something comes of that soon that has a region-wide impact and sort of kind of consolidates everything. Having multiple boards is fine, but it's much easier where there is like one recognized body that's moving the initiative. All efforts are going into one instead of, you're dispersing efforts across different. I hope it materializes.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to have something more local, you have the language, you have the culture, you have the understanding versus sort of, random chapters being connected to a far off entity in the US that's no longer certifying you. It definitely holds a lot more. But it's sort of I'm glad there's a push to it. Just for someone, like me, just doesn't have a whole great understanding of sort of the region itself. Is there a pretty good relationship sort of between the countries in the region, and do sort of the governments tend to look at each other to see how they're doing different things, or is that sort of?
It depends. So, for example, Bahrain is part of the GCC, and I think they do reference one another and collaborate. So there is that, but it depends on the sector. So the level of collaboration, the level of coordination, I think is sector specific. But this board, for example, they will want representatives across different countries in the region. But you're right, culturally, you can't just put us all together in one box. You have the Egypt, and then you've got the GCC, and culturally we're not necessarily that similar, or sort of the socioeconomic levels of the population and at changes. But I think as a region, the GCC is a nice system that has a lot of similarities, and we can definitely learn from each other and implement things more easily, replicate models that are working in another country in the GCC, because there are so many similarities. And we need to bring more attention to how that can be done in our industry and our sector. And that will come. That will come with time and with more clinicians coming out of each of these countries. It's already happening. I can see it on LinkedIn. I can see the new wave of the clinicians. They already have great contacts across the region. Of course, Sharifa and her efforts. She's really brings people together in a phenomenal way. So she set up a WhatsApp group that keeps everybody updated from every Arab speaking, not just national or people in the region, from every Arab speaking practitioner in the world. Listen, it's so nice. Like you would say, I have a family moving to here. Who do you recommend? She constantly has an updated list of centers and certified specialists and programs. And it's phenomenal. As a resource, it's truly phenomenal. So people like Shadi in what she's done, I feel has a huge impact in just keeping everybody involved in the discussions. And a lot of the news and updates I hear about our field comes through those groups, actually.
About networks, tell me a little bit about this network that you're involved in. I'm going to talk to you, alluded to at the beginning.
Okay, so NUMUW is the name of the platform. And it's basically, I realize, and like everybody else, so much of what we do can be done remotely, especially upskilling, like you said, frontline implementers of programs. And people don't want to uproot their life because there isn't services around them. So we really want to connect not just families to experts, but also schools, because schools not afford to onboard the amount of specialists required to serve their student population. Schools are becoming more, they're having much more robust learning support units within the schools. Having a behavioral practitioner it's a no-brainer. It has to be. And so there's a lot of interest from schools. And also it's expanded a bit, because I feel like we've always thought about behavior analysis from a functioning level, adaptive functioning level, or even from an academic level. But how about from the mental health level? I know that I've completely neglected that when programming, because I wasn't aware. The awareness wasn't there. And I'm not trained. So also you don't want to overstep what you can do. But at the same time, there's this huge gap in how we've been programming. NUMUW wants to bring in the experts in mental health. And I don't know if I told you this story, but like I've worked with a kid since he was very young. And what we knew how to teach back then is let's make sure that his behavior is fine. Let's make sure that he has some level of social competence. And let's make sure that academically he can stay in school. So those were what we were teaching for. And then, 15, he's 15 now. And there's all these social, emotional, and mental health issues that have been completely neglected. And as he transitions into young adulthood, you see it. You fail that as a clinician, it comes back and screams in your face. So, and it's not a failure, it's just a lack of awareness. And so you realize, oh my God, we should have been consulting with mental health professionals from the get-go. There's all these skills that we needed to embed into our programming. There's all this that we didn't do. And so I feel like NUMUW is my chance to address the lack of comprehensiveness, the lack of holistic approach to how we're, building skills in kids and what we missed. And I really feel we missed the mental health piece, and it has to come back into the picture. So we're all learning. We're all learning.
What are some of the different practitioners you have in the network?
Okay, so we have psychiatrists, because there are so few psychiatrists in our region generally, but child and adolescent psychologists, they're like unicorns. They just don't exist. And so I've had to bring in psychiatrists and obviously just mental health counselors and behavior analysts who are not focused on early intervention, who know how to deal with kids who are 15, 16, who can be made aware of who they are, what their values are, practicing, for example, in alliance with who they are as people, as opposed to we're just feeding the programming because this is so. And there's a lot of retraining of parents as well. So just that niche of behavior analysts who know how to work with individuals above a certain age, maybe using acceptance commitment therapy or all kinds of different modalities that were not introduced when I was. And so the region needs them. And so I'm trying to onboard a lot of people who can serve children who are older. We have now, I think we've nailed sort of early intervention, but there's so much after that that just is very scarce in terms of resources and services and practitioners.
What are kind of the options or sort of trajectory for adults, autistic adults in Bahrain?
Yeah, I think there is a push to kind of prepare them for employment. And so there's been, and the foundation set up by the parents. She keeps moving with the ages and she keeps trying to advance sort of vocational skills training and connection with the corporate sectors and commercial sectors in Bahrain. And there is, I feel like, more corporate awareness that it is everybody benefits when employability extends to include all kinds of individuals with diverse learning backgrounds, but it's not for everyone. It's just trickling in now. And I feel like you also need practitioners who know how to train and prepare people for the workplace. So it's like you can't get it's not like you can throw people in schools and hope for the best. You also can't throw people into workplaces and hope for the best. It's not fair. And it's the same thing. The more specialists we have who focus on this area, I feel that there will be more willingness in the community because they want to take on. I feel like corporations do want to take on employing people from diverse backgrounds, but they also want to be successful. So they need the specialists to help with that as well.
And are there any services available for folks that maybe might not be ready for employment, that might have sort of more challenges or higher support needs? Are there residential supports, or do the families tend to kind of have to keep taking care of them for the rest of their lives? Like, what's that look like?
It's mixed. So we do, but I feel like most families, even with the elderly, we still sort of live in multi-generational homes, which is a huge blessing. And that is dissolving, of course, as two people in the family need to now work because of just the reality. And people have moved out of multi-generational living situations. And so they are looking for more and more services outside of the home. And I don't have a lot of knowledge of the experience of families with that system.
Right.
But I feel it's still it's still very nascent in terms of reach and the options. I feel like the options be very limited, and overall, if a family can keep their family member living with them, they will opt for that at this point. I think culturally we're still at that level where we feel we can do better than what's out there. Of course, where the behavioral challenges are too extreme, let's say, then people don't have an option, and there are some facilities, but again, depending on who is running them or managing them, you'll have a massive difference in the quality and the experience. So again, everybody's focused on early childhood, or we're focused on now the teenage years or employability, and always a step behind or multiple steps behind.
Yeah. So what are kind of some of the current projects you're working on?
So currently, all my focus is on the platform. I do feel it might be the way to get knowledge into a lot of people's hands at a affordable price. And we'd want to be able to guide parents where they are with at least the right information, at minimum the right. And then obviously, if they want the one-to-one, then they can have a coach. But even that we realize is inaccessible to many people. So we really want to build the resources where at the very least, they know whether what they're being presented is evidence-based, credible, and it's a plan they can follow. For behavior they're dealing with, or for mainly for behavior and mental health. That's kind of the focus. That makes not as much. We want to be able to address sort of functioning, adaptive functioning, behavior, and mental health.
Yeah. And where can people kind of go to learn more about NUMUW?
Okay, well, we are launching our app soon in 2 months, but right now you can get us you can get us just on our platform, which is www.numuw.com. that'll be changing a lot. So maybe come and catch up with us in a month or two.
Gotcha. What is kind of the purpose of the app? Like, what's the app going to do that's sort of different from kind of what's happening right now?
Okay, so the app is going to support a family from the get-go. You will describe whatever behavioral issue or mental health issue or quality of life issue you're dealing with and need support with. And then it will connect you to all kinds of resources that will all be populated to you as you build a child's profile, explain the issues you are dealing with. So you'll have resources, you'll have community, you'll have expertise linked to what it is that you want support with.
What's amazing. Ingy, it's been really cool learning about you, learning about Bahrain, learning about NUMUW. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ben. I've really enjoyed it.
The third secret word is NUMUW. N-U-M-U-W. That's NUMUW. N-U-M-U-W. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out these episodes of Behaviour Speak. Episode 15, Behavior Analysis in Egypt with Radwa Eltanab. Episode 94, Behavior Analysis in Lebanon and Qatar with Rola El Anan. And episode 149, Behavior Analysis in Saudi Arabia with Dr. Shahad Al-Sharif. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok and subscribe to our YouTube page at Behaviour Speak. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.